afternoon, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. We have a lot to discuss today. A little later in the program, we're going to hear from our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera, on some interesting news coming out of Mexico City. And we're also going to hear from our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez. U.S. Senator John Cornyn just went out to his area of responsibility, so we're going to hear what he had to say out at Fort Bliss at that new ICE detention center being constructed there. But first, let's take a look at some of the headlines making news across the border, beginning with a federal judge in San Francisco is hearing arguments today on whether military troops that President Trump deployed to Los Angeles violated a federal law. Now, 4,700 National Guard members and Marines were sent to L.A. following the widespread federal immigration raid protest. The deployment was opposed by Governor Gavin Newsom and city leaders. The law bars troops from conducting law enforcement duties within the country. Now, during this three-day trial, a few things are going to happen. First, the judge is going to decide whether the 1878 Act was violated when President Donald Trump sent those troops to California. Now, the administration has argued that federal military are allowed to protect federal property and federal agents. Now, this case could set precedent for how Trump can deploy National Guard troops in the future in California or other states. For an example, just this week, the president ordered hundreds of troops to Washington, D.C., where he says they will be helping law enforcement fight crime in the nation's capital. Sticking around in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Unified School District says it's implementing plans to protect children and families in fear of immigration officers and ICE raids. Now, the district says they've been in contact with 10,000 families impacted by immigration enforcement efforts. They've started to reroute bus routes, assigned 1,000 staffers to help in school zones, and are offering virtual learning for those families who are afraid to leave their homes. Take a listen to LA Mayor Karen Bass.
Gathered here today to talk about protecting our children from the federal government. That is a profound moment. The fact that we even need to have a press conference to talk about strategies for how we protect our kids.
500,000 Los Angeles school children are expected to return to class on Thursday. Now, turning to our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera, who's joining us live right now. Salvador, you've been keeping an eye on some things coming out of Mexico City. A very interesting one to start off with, and that is the fact that Mexico is saying that they are willing to accept orphaned Palestinian children. Fill us in.
Well, this is as a result of what's going on along the Gaza Strip. As you know, Israel has been bombing the area, conducting other military operations for the better part of 2 years. And Mexico is saying that because of what's going on with the children, that it wants to take in orphans from that part of the world. President Sheinbaum says she is very much in support of some legislation going through the Mexican Senate, where a Mexican senator has proposed that we do bring in orphans, children who have been impacted by the war along the Gaza Strip, but that is still to be decided. But President Sheinbaum said she is very much in favor of doing something like this. She says that Mexico's doors will always be open to people like these children and others from around the world in times of need. She's saying that the best solution would be to create two independent states, not just Israel, but Palestine as well. But of course, Rudy, this is a huge political ball that keeps going, been tossed around for many years to come, and likely will never happen unless the United States gets behind it. And this is something that for many years, including now under the Trump administration, it has refused to support both a Palestinian state and, of course, Israel as we know it.
Now, I have to ask, has Mexico, to your knowledge, ever done something like this before, accepted these young orphaned refugees from war-torn countries?
According to the Mexican senator who is proposing that Mexico accept orphans from Palestine, he is saying that, yes, over the years, Mexico has very much been open to accepting refugees and other victims of wars and strife around the world. And so, according to him, Mexican history does have a place for children and other victims of crime or refugees of wars and stuff. So he's saying yes. To answer your question, Rudy, yes, Mexico has done this in the past.
Now, turning now to these inmates that were part or being held here in the United States, there's also some new reporting that they're being transferred back to Mexico.
We're talking about 14 prisoners, men who were convicted of drug crimes and for their ties to cartels in Mexico under a program that was instituted back in 1977. This is an international program that allows prisoner exchanges, that allows the U.S. to send back prisoners to their origin, country of origin. And this is something that happened just recently. The Department of Justice said they sent back 14 inmates that were currently held or were held in U.S. prisons, send them back to Mexico. DOJ says this will save taxpayers about $4 million because it doesn't have to house these inmates anymore. Now, the inmates collectively had about 90 years left in their sentences, and they will serve them out in Mexico. And DOJ wanted to emphasize that all the inmates who went back requested that they be transferred back to Mexico to finish out their sentences.
Now, is there any reason why someone might want to be transferred back to Mexico other than being closer to home?
Probably, they probably will serve easier time in Mexico, have access to families, perhaps have access to more resources that can be provided to them by their former employers, the cartels. So, but perhaps and probably family ties, being closer to their families, is the biggest reason that they want to do this.
All right, Salvador. And also, that's not the only thing President Sheinbaum was talking about recently. She's been making comments about the so-called alligator Alcatraz detention facility. Can you fill us in on that?
She has discussed there's 81 Mexican nationals at this alligator Alcatraz in southern Florida, this detention facility that opened up last month or weeks ago. And Sheinbaum is saying that the Mexican consulate in the city of Miami is there on a daily basis, providing for the Mexican nationals to make sure that they have everything they need. She's also advocating working with the U.S. government to limit the stay of the Mexican nationals at this alligator Alcatraz, as has been deemed. She wants them to be able to leave that facility as soon as possible. She also went on record yesterday morning during her news conference, daily news conference, saying that she is very much against facilities like the alligator Alcatraz Detention Center and the similar detention facility that is in the works for Texas. So she's saying that she doesn't want Mexican nationals at these facilities. And in the meantime, she will do everything within her power to make sure that they are released as quickly as possible and that they're treated humanely. She was asked if she has noted any human rights violations at this facility. And she said, as of now, she's not aware of any human rights violations at this detention site in southern Florida.
Not any recorded human rights violations, but certainly a lot of complaints coming from folks that are living inside that facility at the moment, being detained. And we'll talk about more about that later, especially as people continue their protests at a lot of these facilities. But thank you so much, Salvador. We appreciate you being here, Salvador Rivera, our San Diego correspondent. Stick around though, because coming up after the break, we're going to talk a little more about a specific ICE detention facility. Our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez, has been there from the beginning as they work to construct a new ICE detention center at Fort Bliss out his way in his area of responsibility. And when we come back, we're going to hear from him on the latest as U.S. Senator from Texas, John Cornyn, visits that location. Stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. Welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas. If you're interested in any of the reporting that you ever see on this program, make sure to visit borderreport.com to get the latest from all of our correspondents. Sandra Sanchez here in South Texas, Salvador Rivera, who you just heard from in San Diego, and including as well, and you're going to hear from him now, our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez. Hey, Julian, how you doing?
Hi, Rudy. Good to be back.
Good to have you, sir. Senator Cornyn was in your neck of the woods recently visiting the Fort Bliss ICE Detention Center. Can you start by filling folks in who may not know exactly what this detention center is?
Yes, Rudy. A few months ago, the White House announced that it was spending upwards of $1 billion in building a mega migrant detention facility in Texas. That facility, we later learned, is going to be located in Fort Bliss, Texas, right adjacent to El Paso. We were the first to visit, to see the facility from the outside. Nobody's really allowed to visit, except for Senator John Cornyn, the Republican from Texas. He was in El Paso yesterday, and he got a what he called a windshield tour, which means he was driven around the facility, what has been built on the facility. You see on our screen that even though construction started only recently, there are several large canvas tents which will be used to house migrants. We previously reported that the facility is going to start receiving migrants next week on or about August 17th. And initially, it's going to be holding up to 1,000 migrants. Now, Senator Cornyn was here in El Paso, and he clarified certain things about the facility from what he learned from officials during his tours. For instance, he says that there's going to be only migrants who have a deportation order or are in the final stages of deportation proceedings at the facility. He says there's not going to be any families or anything like that. I do believe we have some sound from the senator. I don't know if we can play it right now.
Individuals who are called criminal aliens, who are people either with criminal charges pending or criminal convictions, and who have exhausted all of their legal remedies. In other words, there's no due process issue involved here. These are people who basically didn't show up at their immigration hearing, even though they got a notice to appear before an immigration judge. So the judge issued a order of deportation, but these individuals have simply defied those courts' decisions and remained in the United States, even though they had no legal right to do so. And I don't have to remind you how many innocent victims there have been of criminal aliens who have come across the border and harmed Americans and other people here in our country. You know, and I know that many people want to come to the United States. There is a legal way to do that. We honor and respect people who play by the rules, and we are better off for them being here. But when you have open border policies like the Biden administration had, you have no earthly idea who is coming to the United States. And we know.
So, Rudy, that is certainly one perspective about this facility, which is drawing a lot of comments, good and bad, from all over the country. Why? Because it is a symbol. It is a symbol of what the Trump administration wants to do, and that is to achieve a campaign promise of having mass deportations. And what he's finding out, and the reason this is taking some time, it's not as quick as he and his supporters thought, is because there is due process, like the senator says. There is a process for migrants who are in deportation proceedings to go through their court hearings, or like he says, not show up. And then, only then, they become fully deportable, and then they're going to be housed in facilities like this ones and many others, and then they can be finally removed. I know that, and we have reported that other lawmakers, other federal lawmakers, including the Democratic Congresswoman from El Paso, have tried to get access to a number of detention facilities here in El Paso, and they, for one reason or another, they have been denied. And those federal lawmakers that have been able to get into the facilities, like Gabe Vasquez of New Mexico, he got into a federal facility just outside El Paso in Otero County, New Mexico, have not liked what they have seen. So definitely this is a topic that elicits very strong feelings on both sides of the aisle and both sides of the political spectrum nationwide.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually hearing that message from Senator Cornyn about due process, because I think it was last week we had video where the senator said, actually, that that's an arguable statement, that there may not be due process for people who cross into the country illegally. A pretty big switch there.
Definitely, this immigration, the whole immigration issue has to do with politics. And on the one hand, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you have to assure your base, the people that voted you into office, that did vote for you, that you are strong in that regard. But then, obviously, you also have to reassure the general public and the critics that, oh, wait a minute, what I meant is this. So that kind of explains what's going on, and it's nothing new. Every politician from both parties does it.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. Another thing that's unfortunately might become political is something that we've been talking about down here in the Rio Grande Valley, and that is the water debt that Mexico owes the United States on that water treaty we have for them. I know here in the Rio Grande Valley, we are desperate for that water. We actually saw one of the oldest sugar mills in the state, if not the country, if I'm not mistaken, actually shut down in the last 2 years because of the lack of water. We've seen the prices on things like beef go up because the prices on things like hay go up. So tell us a little bit about what the senator had to say regarding that water debt.
Rudy, just a brief piece of context. 5 years ago, when I started with Border Report, there was a similar issue of Mexico not being able to pay its water debt to the U.S. And in the end, what they ended up doing was simply transferring water rights from the water that Mexico receives from the U.S. Don't give it to us; just keep it. We're good. Now, what happens 5 years later is that Mexico again is in the same position of not delivering the water that it owes the United States, and that primarily goes to Texas growers. This time, right now, as we speak, Mexico owes more than 50% of the water that it's liable to the United States, and we only have less than 2 months for the deadline to make the payments. So Senator Corning was here in El Paso, and he says he's not surprised. Mexico always does this, and he says he doesn't really expect Mexico to come through. We have some comments on the water issue.
That's been with us for a long time. This treaty dates back up to 1944, and Mexico never lives up to its responsibilities on a timely basis. What they typically do is wait until the end of the 5-year term of the treaty, and then they release water, but it may be at a time when it's too late, and many agriculture activities have since gone away because they did not have access to water. What we need, in addition to this temporary release, we need regular releases of water from from Mexico, and because we need something our agriculture producers can depend on a timely basis when they can use the water. And so that's going to require some additional negotiation between the United States and Mexico. I don't think we should just let the current treaty stay in place the way it is, because we'll have the same problem once again when they withhold water and for an unreasonable period of time, even though they have it, advantage their agriculture producers in Mexico and disadvantage our folks in Texas and the United States.
So, Rudy, basically, what the senator is saying is this treaty doesn't work. We need a new treaty. That's going to be a challenge. But one thing I can tell you is that even for Mexico, the current treaty does not work. Why? Because they have grown a lot, because their agriculture has morphed into crops, cash crops, that require a lot more water than your standard staples. Here, for instance, south of us in the state of Chihuahua, the complaint is that too much pecan is being grown, and that requires a lot more water than regular crops. So it's an issue that Mexico also has to revisit within its own laws, within its own people, and then come back to the negotiating table with the U.S. Will this happen? We don't know, because it's always a challenge for two countries to get together and draft basically a new law.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask. It's already so difficult. I think people underestimate just how difficult it is to get any kind of treaty done. If I'm not mistaken, you need, both chambers of Congress here in the U.S. to sign off on a treaty. And so with everything that's going on politically, with all the standoffs between President Trump and President Sheinbaum, although they are just words at the moment, and the tariff issue, we haven't even kind of touched on that today. Do you think that that's something that could get done?
I don't think so, because, like you said, our own Congress is kind of divided still. It might still be divided after the 2026 elections. On the Mexican side, the Congress is pretty much in the pocket of the president and the ruling party. So if she doesn't want things to change, nothing's going to change.
Now, I have to ask because, you know, you living in El Paso, I'm sure they do the same thing they do down here in the Rio Grande Valley. Whenever we go into kind of a drought stage, you start seeing these water restrictions. You know, you can only water your yard on certain days. You can only fill your pool on certain days. You can only wash your car on certain days or maybe hours. It just kind of all depends. Is there, do you know, to your knowledge, is there anything like that going on the other side of the border as they kind of, you know, find their own water issues as time goes on?
Well, I can tell it's not going on either side of the border. Back in the 90s, I remember the city of El Paso, for its own reasons, had some sort of a curfew on water use. Right now, and this has to do with geographical differences.
Hmm.
Out there in the valley, water sources are different. Over here in El Paso, we don't really depend on river water for drinking water, so that's not much of an issue.
Okay. And you know, one question I wanted to ask, you know, it's 80 years now since this treaty has been signed. You know, is it both sides? Do you know like what is coming from both sides? I know both sides want to come to a new agreement. I guess, do you know what the U.S. is looking for and what exactly Mexico is looking for? I know you had mentioned, you know, Mexico has their own problems. Is there any kind of idea from officials on either side of the border as to what exactly is wanted?
Senator Cornyn just spoke to that regard. What he is suggesting is regular water deliveries from Mexico. Perhaps not every month because water levels at the reservoirs vary from month to month. But there is a rainy season. There is a time of the year when Mexico does have water, when the U.S. does have water, and that would be a good suggestion. When you do have water and it's a certain level, you will make these payments. Uh, right now, pretty much, Mexico's paying us whenever they feel that they have spare water. And like the senator said, that may be right after the planting season, and that may be no good to us out here in Texas. So that would be one of the solutions. Make schedule water payments, make them regularly.
Yeah, and I think with all the technology we have nowadays, I'm pretty sure it'd be a pretty easy lift to get that kind of thing done, to get that kind of tracking done. So it should be interesting. 80 years old, that treaty. It's definitely time for an update. A lot of things have changed on both sides of the border since then. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Julian. That was Julian Resendez, our El Paso correspondent, joining us. Stay with us because coming up after the break, I've got an update on that IndyCar ice debacle, the one that's causing a lot of uproar amongst both Indy fans and non-race fans across the country. And we're going to talk a little bit more about lawmakers writing a letter to ICE telling them they need to stop wearing masks. Stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to this Tuesday edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. And another story to tell you about. House Democrats are calling on the Trump administration to require ICE officers to be clearly identified when conducting arrests. Now, The Hill, our partners at The Hill are reporting the Democratic Women's Caucus wrote in a letter to ICE and Department of Homeland Security leaders yesterday that the change is necessary to protect women from assaults and kidnappings by imposters. In their letter, the female lawmakers wrote, ICE is increasingly conducting raids and arrests in masks, plain clothes, without visible identification or badges, using unmarked vehicles, tactics that cause confusion, terror, and mistrust among the public. You may remember a couple days ago, we showed you that story out of Connecticut of ICE agents now dressing undercover as construction workers. Now, they go on to say that these tactics could lead to someone impersonating masked ICE agents in order to target and sexually assault women. ICE and DHS did not immediately respond to our partners at The Hill's request for comment on the DWC's letter. Also happening, you may remember last week when we told you how ICE was using an IndyCar to promote its partnership with the Indiana Department of Corrections.
We will defend the homeland.
It's the
Sorry about that. You may remember that last week when we told you how ICE was using an IndyCar to promote its partnership with the Indiana Department of Corrections. It calls for the state to hold up to 1,000 detained immigrants. Now, this morning, dozens of protesters gathered outside the detention center to protest that plan. The Department of Homeland Security is promoting the partnership for what it calls the quote-unquote Speedway Slammer with the ICE logo on an IndyCar. IndyCar has requested that their cars not be used by the government for any branding. Well, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to get more episodes of Border Report Live or find the reporting from Julian Salvador or our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, you can visit borderreport.com. My name is Rudy Mireles. For all three of them, have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.